The smog in this city did not taste like the industrial ash of Gotham. It tasted ancient, a metallic tang of recycled air cycled through ventilation shafts deep enough to pierce the planet's crust. It was the taste of a civilization that had paved over its own history 1,000 times, burying the soil so deep it was merely a myth to the creatures living in the abyss. Bruce Wayne crouched on a gargoyle that wasn't stone, but a ferrocrete extrusion jutting from the 50-story precipice of a residential block. Rain here didn't fall from clouds, it dripped from the leaking atmospheric scrubbers of the levels above, a constant, greasy drizzle that slicked the black armor plating of his suit. He remained perfectly still, his cape heavy with the oily precipitation, blending into the gloom of level 1313. He had been here for 3 cycles. He was learning to measure time by the traffic shifts of the glowing lanes overhead, rather than the position of a sun he couldn't see. His arrival had been violent, a distortion of space-time that had deposited him mid-freefall into a ventilation shaft. The suit's telemetry was mostly offline, the Bat computer was a silent void of static, and his comms picked up nothing but a chaotic babble of alien frequencies. But the mission remained constant. Below him, in the neon-drenched alleyway, the predator and prey dynamic played out with universal familiarity. If you want to see more characters enter different universes, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character and the universe you'd want to see them in down in the comments below. May the Force be with you. 3 assailants surrounded a lone figure. The victim was a Rhodian, his green skin pallid under the flickering orange light of a noodle shop sign. The attackers were human, clad in scuffed blast armor, wielding weapons that hummed with a low-frequency energy Bruce's cow audio dampened automatically. They weren't holding guns, they were holding directed energy weapons. Blasters. "Credits, Bugface, all of them," the leader growled. The language was basic, a syntax simple enough for Bruce to have decoded in his first 12 hours by hacking a public information kiosk. The Rhodian chattered in a panic, holding up hands that trembled. Bruce moved. He didn't drop straight down. The gravity here was standard, 1.mg, but the verticality was deceptive. He fired the grapple gun, aiming for a support strut of a maglev track running above the alley. The line went taut, swinging him in a pendulum arc that defied the sensors of the thugs below. He didn't announce himself. Terror was a silent art. As the leader raised his blaster to pistol-whip the Rhodian, Batman severed the line, dropping the final 20 feet in a controlled free-fall. His boots slammed into the leader's shoulders, driving the man face-first into the greatwork floor with a sickening crunch of impact-resistant plastoid. The remaining 2 thugs spun around, their reaction sluggish compared to the rogues gallery of Gotham. They raised their weapons. Batman was already moving. He flared his cape, a wall of black fabric that swallowed the ambient light. The thug on the left fired. A bolt of red plasma sizzled through the air, hotter than anything Bruce had anticipated. It grazed the edge of his cape, instantly cauterizing the memory cloth. Directed plasma, no ballistics. Armor plating will degrade after 2 direct hits. Evasion is priority. The analysis flashed through his mind in a millisecond. Bruce pivoted, stepping inside the guard of the shooter. He drove a gauntleted palm under his chin, followed by a knee to the solar plexus. The thug gasped, the air driven from his lungs, and collapsed. The remaining attacker, terrified by the sudden violence, fumbled with his weapon. Batman closed the distance, stripping the blaster from the man's grip with a calculated twist of the wrist. He disassembled the weapon in 3 distinct motions, the power pack clattering to the floor before the thug even realized he was disarmed. A swift strike to the temple ended the fight. Silence returned to the alley, save for the hum of the distant traffic and the Rhodian's terrified breathing. The alien looked at the towering figure in black, eyes wide and black as obsidian. Thank you, he stammered in broken basic. Batman ignored the gratitude. He knelt by the unconscious leader, his white lenses narrowing as he scanned the thug's armor. There was no badge, but there was a tattoo on the neck, a stylized sunburst, a gang sign. "Go," Batman rasped. The voice modulator added a sub-bass growl that vibrated in the Rhodian's chest. The alien didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled away into the darkness. Bruce stood holding the disassembled blaster power pack. It was crude but efficient energy storage. If he could reverse engineer the interface, he could recharge the rapidly depleting lithium-ion cells in his utility belt. He pocketed the device and prepared to grapple away. Then the sound of marching boots echoed against the metal walls. Batman melted back into the shadows of a recessed doorway, pulling the cloak tight. A squad of armored soldiers rounded the corner. They were encased in white plastoid armor, pristine and terrifyingly uniform. Stormtroopers, the local law enforcement, or so it seemed. Bruce watched, expecting them to secure the scene. "Status report," the lead trooper commanded, his voice filtered through a helmet vocoder. A subordinate nudged the unconscious gang leader with his boot. "Unconscious. Looks like a brawl, sir." "Is he Black Sun?" "Affirmative. Syndicate tattoos." The commander didn't call for a medic. He didn't call for a transport. He unholstered his blaster rifle. "The Moff wants the streets clear for the inspection tomorrow. Processing paperwork for scum like this wastes Imperial resources." Bruce's eyes narrowed behind the cowl. The trooper aimed at the unconscious man's head. Snap, hiss. A red bolt ended the gang leader's life. The other two unconscious thugs were executed with the same mechanical efficiency. "Clean this up," the commander ordered, "and find whoever did this to them. If there's a vigilante operating in Sector 4, I want him found and publicly executed for disturbing the peace." They dragged the bodies toward a refuse chute. Bruce Wayne remained motionless in the dark, his heart rate steady, but his mind racing. In Gotham, the police were corrupt, incompetent, or overwhelmed. But this wasn't corruption, this was policy. The soldiers in white weren't peacekeepers, they were an occupying force in their own city. He had spent 3 days surviving, eating nutrient paste stolen from cargo docks and observing the chaotic flow of the underworld. He had thought he was dealing with a standard criminal element. He was wrong. He wasn't just dealing with gangs like the Black Sun. He was looking at a systemic, totalitarian structure that sanctioned murder to maintain order. The entire planet was a crime scene. Batman looked up toward the distant, unseen sky, past the layers of traffic and steel. Somewhere up there sat the men who gave these orders. He didn't need to go home to find a purpose. He had found one here. He waited until the patrol moved on, then grappled back up to his gargoyle. He needed a secure location. He needed access to the planetary information network, the HoloNet, and he needed to understand the hierarchy of this empire. The Batman had hunted mob bosses, psychopaths, and gods, but tonight he realized he was hunting a government. The Undercity was a sprawling labyrinth of technological decay, a graveyard where the galaxy threw its unwanted secrets. Bruce Wayne had found a discarded industrial maintenance sub-basement 3 levels down from where he had saved the Rhodian. It was damp, smelling of ozone and mold, but it was defensible. He had spent the last 6 hours stripping copper wiring and logic boards from a defunct sanitation droid to build a bridge. His cowl's interface was advanced, perhaps the most advanced tactical computer on Earth, but here it spoke a dead language. He needed a translator. Bruce sat on a crate, the cowl removed, revealing eyes rimmed with exhaustion, but burning with intensity. He held a soldering iron he'd fashioned from a heating element and a fusion battery. With surgical precision, he fused the stripped droid interface port into the side of a stolen data pad. Connection established. The cowl's HUD flickered to life, scrolling through streams of irrelevant text. The translation software, running on a heuristic algorithm he'd coded during his first night, began to decrypt the symbols into English. He wasn't interested in the local news or the weather. He was looking for the org chart. Bruce accessed the public Holonet archives. He worked backwards. The recent destruction of a planetary body called Alderaan, the subsequent annihilation of the Death Star battle station. The propaganda painted a picture of chaos, terrorists, rebels, Jedha insurgents. He dug deeper, bypassing civilian firewalls with encryption keys that, while alien in code architecture, suffered from the same laziness as human security protocols. Passwords were still passwords. The history of the galaxy unspooled before him. 20 years ago, the Clone Wars, a manufactured conflict. The transition, the Galactic Republic reorganized into the Galactic Empire. The justification, security, stability, order. Bruce paused the stream on a recording of a speech given to the Senate. A disfigured man in hooded robes spoke of a safe and secure society. Emperor Sheev Palpatine. Bruce studied the face, the hooded eyes, the snarl disguised as a smile. He had seen men like this before. In Gotham, they wore Italian suits and sat at the back of Italian restaurants. Here, they wore velvet robes and sat on thrones. The aesthetic changed, the pathology did not. Palpatine wasn't a politician. He was a crime boss who had successfully legitimized his racket on a galactic scale. "Computer," Bruce muttered, his voice echoing in the empty basement. "Isolate high command structure." The cowl projected a holographic pyramid into the damp air. At the base, stormtroopers, local garrisons, regional governors, the muscle and the capos. In the middle, the moffs, grand moffs, the lieutenants running the territories. At the apex, the emperor. But there was an anomaly. Standing outside the pyramid, yet casting a shadow over the entire structure, was a figure clad in black armor that mirrored Bruce's own theatricality. Lord Darth Vader. The files were redacted, heavy with rumor and fear. Executor, Supreme Commander, Sorcerer. Bruce zoomed in on a grainy security hologram of Vader leading a purge on a Wookiee homeworld. The figure didn't just command, he slaughtered. He deflected blaster bolts with a glowing red sword. He lifted men off the ground without touching them. Telekinesis, Bruce whispered, his analytical mind rejecting the mystical in favor of the scientific. Magnetic manipulation? Gravity gauntlets? He earmarked the file. Vader was the enforcer, the heavy hand. If Palpatine was Falcone, Vader was the cleaner, but with the destructive capacity of a tactical nuke. Then Bruce found the doctrine, the Tarkin doctrine, rule by fear. Bruce read the manifesto. Fear will keep the local systems in line. A cold smile touched Bruce's lips. It was a familiar philosophy. He had built his entire crusade on the weaponization of fear. The Empire believed they had mastered it because they had bigger guns. They believed that the fear of death was the ultimate motivator. They were wrong. The fear of death was primitive. The fear of the unknown, of the shadow that moves, of the justice that cannot be bribed or bargained with. That was the true breaker of wills. The Empire was a monopoly. They had no competition in the marketplace of terror. That changes tonight. He needed resources. The utility belt was running low on chemical compounds. His grapple propellant was down to 15%. His armor needed reinforcement against plasma weaponry. Bruce pulled up a map of level 131. He overlaid crime statistics with Imperial patrol routes. He found a nexus point, a secure warehouse district operated by the Black Sun Syndicate, but flagged in the Imperial database as a do not approach zone. Why would the police avoid a criminal warehouse? Because they were on the payroll, or because the Black Sun was moving product off the books for the Empire. Bruce stood, pulling the cowl back over his head. The white lenses snapped into place, glowing softly in the gloom. He wasn't just going to rob a warehouse, he was going to send a message up the chain of command. He checked the modified power pack he'd stolen from the thug. It was wired into his belt now, providing a harm of energy that felt raw and unrefined compared to Wayne tech, but it would hold. He moved to the exit of the basement, his cape dragging slightly in the dust. He had the names, he had the hierarchy, he knew who the bosses were. Now he had to see what they were afraid of. As he stepped out into the neon rain, a broadcast blared from a massive holoscreen mounted on a distant spire. It was a mandatory update from the Imperial Security Bureau, ISB. Citizens are reminded that unauthorized travel between levels is prohibited. Curfew is in effect. Report any suspicious activity immediately. Batman fired his grapple gun. The cable hissed, biting into the metal overhang of a maglev track. He ascended into the smog, a silent anomaly in a system designed to crush individuality. The Black Sun warehouse was 10 blocks away. To the Empire, it was a logistical asset. To Bruce Wayne, it was a hardware store. The Black Sun warehouse sat on the edge of District 1313, like a fortress of rust and reinforced durasteel. It didn't look like much from the outside, just another decaying industrial block in a city of millions. But the heat signatures bleeding through the walls told a different story. Bruce lay prone on a ventilation conduit 50 meters above the loading bay. His cowl's thermal imaging was struggling. The ambient heat of Coruscant's lower levels was intense, masking body heat. But he had adjusted the contrast, filtering out the static machinery to highlight the biological rhythmic movement of the guards below. There were 8 sentries, 4 humans, 2 Rhodians, and 2 massive reptilian creatures he hadn't encountered before. Their scales were thick, and they carried heavy repeating blasters slung over their shoulders like toys. Trandoshans, the database supplied. Species traits, regenerative healing, infrared vision. Bruce stiffened. If they had infrared, the shadows were useless. He was a glowing beacon of body heat in the cold rain. One of the Trandoshans hissed, snapping its snout toward the ventilation conduit. It raised a clawed hand, signaling the others. Batman didn't wait to be discovered. He triggered the release on a canister he'd salvaged from a coolant leak earlier that day. A cloud of supercooled pressurized gas exploded around him, instantly dropping his surface temperature and creating a blinding white fog. The Trandoshan roared, firing blindly into the mist. Red plasma bolts tore through the conduit, melting metal like wax. Batman dropped from the cloud, not as a man, but as a freezing shadow. He landed directly on the reptilian guard, his boots magnetizing to the creature's chest plate to anchor him. The Trandoshan bucked, but Batman drove 2 modified stun batons, jury-rigged from stolen riot prods, into the creature's neck. The electrical discharge was lethal for a human. For the Trandoshan, it merely locked its nervous system in a seizure. The giant fell. The remaining 7 guards opened fire. Bruce rolled, his cape swirling. The fabric hissed as a stray bolt grazed it, burning a hole through the scalloped edge. Too vulnerable. He needed cover. He fired a grapple line, not up, but horizontal, snagging a cargo container suspended on a repulsor sled. He engaged the winch, launching himself feet first toward the cluster of human guards. The impact shattered the formation. Bones snapped. Batman moved through them with a brutal fluidity. These men were soldiers of fortune, used to barroom brawls and blaster fights at 20 paces. They were not prepared for a master of 127 martial arts who used darkness as a physical weapon. He broke the arm of a Rhodian reaching for a thermal detonator, caught the device before it hit the ground, and slapped it onto the back of a retreating human guard's armor. "Run," Batman growled. The thug screamed and sprinted away from his comrades toward the blast doors. Batman triggered the detonator remotely, not to kill, but to breach. The small sphere exploded, blowing the heavy doors off their magnetic hinges and sending the thug flying into a pile of refuse, stunned but alive. The loading bay was clear. Batman didn't waste time. He dragged the unconscious bodies into a pile and secured them with high tensile cabling stripped from the cargo winches. Then he entered the warehouse. It was an Aladdin's cave of illicit warfare. Crates of blaster rifles, Tubana gas canisters, and military-grade explosives lined the walls, but Bruce ignored the offensive weaponry. He moved to the back, scanning shipping manifests with his cowl. Shipment 494. Destination: Imperial Inquisitorius Training Facility, Coruscant Surface. Contents: Frick alloy plating, cortosis-weave prototypes. Bruce paused. Cortosis. The database flagged it. Rare conductive material. Shorts out energy weapons upon contact. Extremely durable. This was what he needed. He cracked the crate open. Inside lay sheets of a dull, fibrous gray mesh destined for the armor of Jedi hunters. Bruce pulled a sheet out, testing its weight. It was light, flexible. He cleared a workbench, sweeping aside half-assembled blasters. This would be his foundry. For the next 2 hours, the Dark Knight became the engineer. He stripped his batsuit down to the undersuit. He cut the cortosis-weave into geometric plates, layering them over his chest, shoulders, and cowl. He used an industrial laser welder to fuse the alien alloy with his Wayne-Tech Kevlar titanium weave. The result was a hybrid armor. It wasn't as refined as Lucius Fox's work. The welds were visible, giving the suit a rougher, more industrial aesthetic, but it was functional. He tested a scrap piece by firing a captured blaster pistol at it point blank. The energy bolt hit the weave and dissipated instantly, the material absorbing and grounding the charge. Next, the cape. He found a spool of distinct black fabric labeled shadow silk, a material used by assassins for sound dampening. He lined the tattered remains of his cape with it, coating the exterior with a spray-on ablative shielding for starship hulls. Finally, the offensive. He picked up a thermal detonator, a sphere of beradium, highly unstable. He carefully disassembled the casing, exposing the glowing core. Using a microcutter, he sliced the core into small disc-shaped charges and embedded them into the empty casings of his batarangs. Explosive batarangs, yield enough to breach a blast door. He refilled his grapple gun with high-tensile liquid cable used for towing starfighters. As he finished reassembling his gauntlets, a red light began to flash on the warehouse console, a silent alarm. The main bay doors hissed open. Batman killed the lights in the workshop. He stepped into the shadows of the rafters, his new armor dull and non-reflective. A squad of figures entered. They weren't stormtroopers. They wore black armor, red visors, and moved with a terrifying synchronization. Death troopers, elite Imperial intelligence units. Perimeter breach detected. Scan for biologicals. They scanned the room. Their sensors swept over the unconscious Black Sun guards, then moved to the workbench. "Someone has been fabricating," the lead trooper said, examining the discarded scraps of cortosis. "This is unauthorized modification of restricted Imperial assets. Sector is clear. No visual on intruder."
From the darkness above, two white eyes opened. Batman dropped a smoke pellet, not his usual formula, but a mixture he'd compounded from carbonite dust and sulfur. The gray cloud erupted instantly, freezing the moisture in the air and jamming the troopers' thermal sensors. Contact! The Death Troopers opened fire, their heavy blasters lighting up the cloud with green stroboscopic flashes. Batman dropped into the center of the chaos. A bolt struck his chest. The new cortosis plating hissed, absorbing the energy and glowing faintly for a split second before cooling. Bruce didn't even flinch. He moved faster than before. The shadow silk cape silenced his movements completely. He struck the first trooper with a palm heel strike that shattered the helmet's vocal coder. As the trooper reeled, Batman slapped a modified explosive batarang on the back of the second trooper's knee joint. Boom! The joint severed. The trooper collapsed. The remaining 7 troopers opened fire. Bruce rolled, his cape swirling. The fabric hissed as a stray bolt grazed it, burning a hole through the scalloped edge. Too vulnerable. He needed cover. He fired a grapple line, not up, but horizontal, snagging a cargo container suspended on a repulsor sled. He engaged the winch, launching himself feet first toward the cluster of human guards. The impact shattered the formation. Bones snapped. Batman moved through them with a brutal fluidity. These men were soldiers of fortune, used to barroom brawls and blaster fights at 20 paces. They were not prepared for a master of 127 martial arts who used darkness as a physical weapon. He broke the arm of a Rhodian reaching for a thermal detonator, caught the device before it hit the ground, and slapped it onto the back of a retreating human guard's armor. "Run," Batman growled. The thug screamed and sprinted away from his comrades toward the blast doors. Batman triggered the detonator remotely, not to kill, but to breach. The small sphere exploded, blowing the heavy doors off their magnetic hinges and sending the thug flying into a pile of refuse, stunned but alive. The loading bay was clear. Batman didn't waste time. He dragged the unconscious bodies into a pile and secured them with high tensile cabling stripped from the cargo winches. Then he entered the warehouse.
The rain on Coruscant never truly washed anything clean. It only slicked the grime into a more treacherous surface. Prosit Dibbs, known now only as the 10th brother, stood on the precipice of Platform 7 Alpha. He was a man stripped of his past, encased in the black, angular armor of the Inquisitorius. His red lightsabers were deactivated, clipped to his belt, but the dark side boiled around him like a heat mirage. He had been tracking a disturbance. The Imperial Security Bureau had reported a series of precise, brutal assaults on Black Sun supply lines that were quietly funneling materials to the Inquisitorius. The ISB called it a gang war. The 10th brother knew better. The violence was too targeted, the disruption too absolute. It smelled of a Jedi. He walked through the silent shipping yard, his boots echoing on the wet durasteel. The area was littered with the bodies of syndicate mercenaries. They weren't dead. Scans confirmed life signs, but they were broken. Femurs snapped, shoulders dislocated, nervous systems overwhelmed by trauma. "Come out," the 10th brother called, his voice amplified by the vocoder. "I can smell your fear. I can sense the light clinging to you like a disease." He reached out with the Force, expanding his senses to the catwalks and shadows. He expected to find the bright, pulsing signature of a Force sensitive trying to shield their presence. He found nothing. It was disorienting. There was a void in the Force where a man should be. No panic, no serenity, no life signature at all. Just the cold, mechanical hum of the maglev trains passing overhead. Thwip! A sound cut through the rain. The 10th brother ignited his lightsabers instantly, the twin red blades spinning in a defensive arc.
A projectile sparked against the plasma, detonating with a concussive flash. Smoke. Thick, chemical smoke that didn't smell like standard military issue. It smelled of sulfur and fear. "Parlor tricks," the Inquisitor sneered. He thrust his hand forward, unleashing a wave of telekinetic energy to disperse the cloud. The smoke cleared, but the attacker was gone. Behind. The 10th brother spun, slashing horizontally at head height. His blade met resistance, but not the crackle of another lightsaber. It met a dull, gray gauntlet. Impossible. The red plasma hissed and sputtered as it made contact with the cortosis-weave. The energy circuit in the saber staff destabilized, the blade shorting out for a critical second. In that second, the Inquisitor saw his opponent. A demon in black armor, a cowl with white, soulless eyes, a cape that seemed to be made of the night itself. Batman didn't hesitate. He drove a fist into the Inquisitor's solar plexus. The armor absorbed some of the impact, but the force behind it was staggering. The 10th brother stumbled back, his breath hitching. "You are no Jedi," the Inquisitor spat, reactivating his blades. The cortosis had only disrupted the energy field temporarily. The red hum returned, angrier than before. "And you," the voice from the demon was a gravelly sub-bass, "are overconfident." The 10th brother roared, leaping into the air, his blades becoming a spinning disk of death. He descended on the vigilante. Batman analyzed the attack vector in slow motion. Telekinetic assisted jump, velocity increased by 40%. The weapon relies on gyroscopic motors to spin. Vulnerability, the hub. Batman didn't block. He rolled forward, passing directly under the spinning arc of plasma. As he moved, he released 3 small pellets from his belt. They magnetized to the Inquisitor's boots. The 10th brother landed and turned to strike, but the pellets detonated, not with fire, but with a high-yield expanding foam that hardened instantly upon contact with the air. The Inquisitor's feet were cemented to the deck plating. "Insolent scum!" The 10th brother focused his rage, raising his hand to crush the vigilante's throat with the force. Batman felt the pressure immediately, an invisible vice grip tightening around his windpipe. He was lifted an inch off the ground. His oxygen supply was cut. Telekinesis requires concentration, requires line of sight. Batman triggered the sonic disruptors built into the ears of his cowl. A directed blast of high-frequency sound, pitch-shifted to cause maximum disorientation in the human inner ear, slammed into the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor screamed, clutching his helmet. The force choke broke instantly as his concentration shattered. Batman dropped to the floor, gasping for air, but moving immediately. He couldn't go toe-to-toe with a telekinetic in a fair fight, so he made it unfair. He threw 2 batarangs. The Inquisitor, recovering from the sonic assault, slashed them out of the air. The explosion blinded him for a split second. Batman closed the distance. He wasn't aiming for the man, he was aiming for the weapon. He caught the Inquisitor's wrist. The cortosis gauntlet endured the heat of the lightsaber hilt. With a calculated twist, he snapped the mechanical housing of the spinning saber. The weapon sparked and died. The Inquisitor, disarmed and enraged, resorted to raw power. He unleashed a force push, a chaotic blast of energy meant to pulverize. Batman deployed his cape. The rigid structure locked into a glider formation, catching the wave of force. He was thrown backward, skidding across the wet durasteel. The impact was distributed. He slammed into a shipping container, the wind knocked out of him. Pain flared in his ribs. Broken, minimum 2. The Inquisitor ripped his boots free from the foam with a burst of the dark side. He marched towards the fallen vigilante, pulling a backup lightsaber, a single blade, from his belt. "I don't know what you are, but I will dissect you to find out." Batman looked up. His HUD was glitching, his armor was scorched, but his hand was hidden behind his cape, gripping the grapple gun. You rely on the weapon. You rely on the magic. You've forgotten how to fight. I am the dark side. You're a man with a glow stick. Batman fired. The grapple line didn't hit the Inquisitor. It hit the heavy maglev cargo container suspended directly above him. The liquid cable wrapped around the release mechanism. Batman yanked. 3 tons of shipping crate plummeted. The 10th brother looked up, his eyes widening behind the helmet. He raised both hands, catching the massive container with the force. He groaned under the strain, his knees buckling. The metal groaned as he held it suspended feet above his head. You cannot crush me, the Inquisitor strained. I don't have to, Batman said. He stood up and walked away. Coward! The Inquisitor screamed, his focus entirely consumed by holding the crushing weight. Fight me! Batman didn't look back. He pressed a button on his belt. The explosive batarangs he had planted on the container's side during the initial chaos detonated. The container didn't explode, but the contents did. It was a shipment of Tibanna gas. The blast was directed downward. The 10th brother's concentration broke. The force failed him. The container slammed down, crushing the platform and sending the Inquisitor plummeting into the misty abyss of the lower levels along with the burning wreckage. Bruce stood alone on the platform, the rain hissing against his heart armor. He walked to the edge and looked down. No body. The fall was survivable for a user of their abilities. He hadn't expected to kill him. He had expected to send a message. He picked up the shattered remains of the Inquisitor's double-bladed lightsaber. He examined the kyber crystal inside, cracked, bleeding red energy. Power source confirmed. Crystalline matrix. Usable. He pocketed the crystal. As he turned to leave, his cowl picked up a low-frequency transmission. It wasn't Imperial. It was an encrypted burst originating from a ventilation shadow 50 meters away. Someone had been watching. Identify, Batman whispered to his computer. Target locked. Human, male. Scans indicate paramilitary gear. No Imperial transponder. Batman vanished into the shadows, moving towards the observer. The Empire was the target, but he needed to know who else was playing the game.
The shadows of Coruscant were not empty. They were merely occupied by things that knew how to stay quiet. But silence was relative. To a man who had trained his hearing to isolate the heartbeat of a hostage in a crowded room, the heavy, rhythmic breathing of the observer 50 meters away was as loud as a shout. Batman moved. He didn't run, he flowed, the shadow silk cape rendering his passage through the rain completely soundless. He flanked the position, moving vertically up a rusted drainage pipe to gain the high ground. The observer was perched on a jagged outcropping of rebar and concrete, peering through macro binoculars at the smoking ruin where the Inquisitor had fallen. He wore a heavy parka, drab earth tones that stood out against the neon black of the city. A modified A280 CFE blaster rifle rested against his shoulder. He was a professional. He checked his six, he watched his corners, but he was looking for a soldier. Not a shadow. Batman dropped. He landed directly behind the man, his boots making no sound on the wet concrete. You're watching the wrong target. The reaction was instantaneous. The man spun, dropping the macro binoculars and snapping the rifle up in a blur of movement. It was a kill shot reflex. Batman's hand was faster. He chopped the barrel of the rifle, deflecting the muzzle flash upward into the rain. A bolt of blue plasma sizzled harmlessly into the night. With his other hand, Batman grabbed the man's tactical vest, lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the rusted wall. "Who are you?" Batman growled, the voice modulator ratcheting up the intimidation.
The man didn't flinch, his eyes, dark and tired, locked onto the white lenses of the cowl. There was no fear there, only a weary calculation. "Someone who hates the Empire as much as you do," the man said. His accent was distinct, Festian. Batman scanned him. Facial recognition match. Cassian Andor. Affiliation. Alliance intelligence. Status. Captain. Threat level. High. "You're a rebel," Batman said, tightening his grip. "Alliance intelligence. You specialize in assassination, sabotage, and moral compromise." Cassian's eyes narrowed. "You know who I am. Good. Then you know we're on the same side." "We are not on the same side." Batman released him, stepping back but keeping his guard raised. "I don't kill." Cassian straightened his jacket, keeping his hands visible but near his holster. "I just watched you drop a shipping container on an Inquisitor. You think he survived that?" "He's a Force user. I suspect he survived the fall. If he didn't, it was his arrogance that killed him, not my hand." "Semantics," Cassian scoffed. "You're fighting a war whether you admit it or not, and you're doing it alone. That's a good way to die." From the shadows behind Cassian, a towering metallic shape emerged. It was an Imperial security droid, but its movements were loping and uncoordinated, its plating scored with blaster marks. "Captain," the droid droned in a monotone British accent, "my sensors indicate a 98% probability that this individual is mentally unstable. He is wearing a bat costume." "Stand down, K2," Cassian ordered without looking back. "I am standing down. I am merely observing the tactical absurdity of the situation." Batman looked at the droid. KX series security droid, reprogrammed, structural weaknesses, neck servos, hip joints. "I don't need your help," Batman said, turning away, "and I don't want your recruitment pitch." "You need intel," Cassian pressed, stepping forward. "You're hitting the Black Sun to hurt the Inquisitorius. You're smart, you figured out the supply chain, but you don't know the endgame." Batman paused. He turned his head slightly. "Talk." Cassian tapped a button on his wrist unit, projecting a small hologram of a complex cybernetics facility located in the industrial sector. "Project Dirge," Cassian said. "The Empire isn't just arming the Inquisitors, they're trying to build better ones. Cybernetic augmentation, life support integration. They're trying to replicate the technology that keeps Vader alive, but mass produce it for elite hunters." Batman studied the schematic. It was a nightmare of biology and machinery. "Why tell me?" "Because we don't have the assets to hit it," Cassian admitted, his voice hard. "My orders are to gather intel and extract. The Alliance Council is too afraid to authorize a strike in the core worlds. They think it's suicide." He looked at Batman. "But you're suicide. You're a ghost. You could burn it down." "I don't burn things down," Batman said. "I dismantle them. Whatever you call it, the result is the same." Cassian holstered his weapon. "We can provide you with extraction, safe harbor, a way off this rock." "I'm not leaving." "Everyone leaves Coruscant eventually, in a ship or in a box." Batman walked to the edge of the roof. He looked out over the sprawling city, a trillion lights hiding a trillion crimes. The rebellion wanted to overthrow the government. They wanted a political victory. They were willing to sacrifice pawns to capture kings. Bruce Wayne had no interest in kings. He was interested in saving the pawns. "Your alliance," Batman said, his back to them. "You bomb military targets. You accept civilian casualties as collateral damage." "We do what is necessary," Cassian snapped, his composure cracking for a second. "You think you can arrest them? You think you can put Palpatine on trial?" "I think," Batman said, turning to face them, his cape flaring in the wind, "that when you become a killer to fight killers, you've already lost." "Then how do you win?" "By becoming something they can't kill and something they can't corrupt." Batman raised his gauntlet. He didn't fire a weapon. He fired a localized data spike. A narrow beam of transmission hit Cassian's whist unit. "Hey!" K2SO shouted, stepping forward. "He is stealing our data." "I'm taking the schematics for the facility," Batman said calmly, "and I'm encrypting your comms channels. The ISB has been listening to your frequency for the last 20 minutes. You're welcome." Cassian looked down at his datapad. The frequency hopped, locking into a new, heavily encrypted algorithm. He looked back up, stunned. "Who are you?" Cassian whispered. "I'm the reason the shadows are afraid of the dark." Batman fired his grapple gun, the liquid cable snapping taut against a passing hover train. He launched himself into the air, vanishing into the smog and rain before the rebels could speak another word. Cassian stood in the silence, the rain dripping from his nose. "Did he just steal our mission?" K2SO asked, tilting his head. "No," Cassian said, staring at the spot where the bat had been. "I think he just saved us from it." "I find him vague and unconvincing," the droid muttered. "Come on," Cassian said, turning back to the shadows. "We need to report this. Monfa isn't going to believe it." Batman swung through the canyons of steel, the wind roaring in his ears. He had the location, Project Dirge, an Imperial cybernetics lab. Cassian was right about one thing. The Empire is trying to build monsters, but he was wrong about the solution. You don't bomb the lab and kill the scientists. You expose the horror. You break the machine so thoroughly that it can never be repaired. And you make sure that the man responsible, Darth Vader, knows exactly who did it. Bruce Wayne checked his utility belt. The red kyber crystal pulsated in a lead-lined pouch. He needed to integrate it. His gadgets were running on borrowed time. If he was going to infiltrate a high-security Imperial lab, he needed an energy source that didn't run out. He needed to bleed the crystal. Or perhaps he simply needed to bend it to his will, not with the Force, but with physics. The Dark Knight turned his glide toward the industrial sector. The rebellion fought wars. Batman fought crime. And tonight, the crime was the desecration of the human form.
The Imperial Cybernetics Division, deeply embedded within the industrial sector of Coruscant, did not look like a place of healing. It looked like a tomb. The facility was a sterile monolith of white durasteel and harsh LED lighting, a stark contrast to the grime of level 1313. Here, the air was scrubbed clean of ozone and rot, smelling instead of antiseptic and cauterized flesh. Bruce Wayne sat in the maintenance crawl space above the primary surgical theater. He was not looking at the facility, he was looking at the heart of his own suit. In his gauntleted hand, the red kyber crystal hummed. It was a violent, unstable thing, vibrating with a frequency that felt like anger. To a Jedi, this was a spiritual object, a manifestation of the Force. To Bruce Wayne, it was a condensed energy matrix with a piezoelectric output potential that defied standard physics. He didn't pray to it, he engineered it. He had cannibalized the power regulator from his damaged grapple gun and wired it into the chest plate of his suit. He placed the crystal inside a lead-lined containment ring, connecting it to the suit's depleted power grid. "Integration," he whispered. He closed the circuit. The crystal screamed, a high-pitched whine that was almost telepathic, before the regulator clamped down on the energy spike. The suit's systems flared to life. The HUD didn't just flicker, it burned with renewed clarity. His servo-assist motors hummed with an aggressive torque. The red crystal glowed faintly beneath the cortosis-weave on his chest, a beating heart of captured rage. Power levels, 400%. Efficiency, unknown. Risk of overload, high. Manageable, Bruce noted. He dropped from the vent. The floor of the laboratory was occupied by medical droids, FX-7 and 21B units, but they had been modified. Their manipulator arms held bone saws and laser scalpels designed for amputation, not restoration. 2 stormtroopers guarded the blast doors. They didn't hear him land. The new power source hummed at a frequency outside human hearing, but it acted as a localized jammer for their helmet comms. Batman moved like a wraith. He grabbed the heads of both troopers simultaneously. The servo motors in his arms, supercharged by the crystal, exerted crushing pressure. The helmets cracked. The troopers slumped without a sound. He moved to the central console. He needed to understand what they were building. The files opened. Project Dirge, Phase 2. The schematics displayed on the holoscreen were nauseating. The Empire wasn't just building prosthetics. They were taking critically wounded soldiers, and in some cases healthy political prisoners, and surgically removing redundant biologicals, limbs, organs, pain receptors, replacing them with cybernetics linked directly to the cerebral cortex. They were trying to mass-produce Darth Vader. Subject 73, the log read. Rejection of cybernetic lung integration. Subject terminated. Subject 74. Neural pathways fused. Aggression levels optimal. Bruce looked through the observation glass into the operating theater. On the table lay a Wookiee. The creature was strapped down, unconscious. Its left arm and right leg were gone, replaced by heavy black mechanical limbs that looked strikingly similar to the Dark Lord's armor. A life support unit was being drilled into the Wookiee's chest. This wasn't medicine, it was mechanization. The Empire viewed flesh as a weakness to be cured. Bruce's eyes narrowed. He began to download the schematics, but his focus shifted to the life support architecture. If they were copying Vader's suit, they were also copying his weaknesses. He analyzed the blueprints. Primary life support, thoracic unit, dependent on electrical cycling. Shielding, high against blaster fire, low against ion disruption. Neural interface, direct connection to the spine. Pain inhibitors set to maximum. If inhibitors are disabled, sensory overload would be incapacitating. They didn't fix the flaw, they just armored it, Bruce whispered. He realized the arrogance of the design. The Empire believed their technology was invulnerable because it was strong. They didn't account for finesse. A door hissed open on the far side of the lab. A man walked in. He wore the white uniform of the Imperial Science Bureau, but he had a Mon Calamari eye patch cybernetic grafted to his face. Dr. Silo. The vitals are fluctuating, Silo snapped at a medical droid. Increase the sedative dosage. If we lose another subject before the Emperor's inspection, I will smelt you for scrap. Doctor, the droid replied. Security sensors in Sector 4 are offline. Probably a rat chewing the wires. Ignore it. I wouldn't, a voice said from the shadows. Silo spun around. Batman stepped into the light. The red glow of the kyber crystal in his chest piece cast a sinister hue over the white room. He looked massive, the cortosis armor bulking out his silhouette, the cape pooling around him like spilled oil. Security! Silo shouted, reaching for a panic button. Batman threw a batarang. It didn't explode. It sliced the console, severing the connection to the alarm grid. You're experimenting on living things, Batman said, walking forward. The heavy boots clanked rhythmically on the tile. This is state-sanctioned research. Silo backed away, pulling a holdout blaster. He fired. Batman didn't dodge. He caught the bolt on his palm. The cortosis gauntlet absorbed the energy, the mesh glowing briefly. He reached Silo, slapped the blaster out of his hand, then lifted the scientist by the lapels of his pristine white tunic. You're making monsters, Batman growled. You are making the future, Silo gasped, his cybernetic eye whirring frantically. Order, perfection, flesh is weak. We are making it eternal. You're making slaves. Batman looked at the Wookiee on the table. The creature let out a low, pained moan. Release them, Batman ordered. I can't. The process is halfway complete. Without the support systems, they die. Batman looked at the life support readout. He tapped into the medical mainframe with his gauntlet interface. I'm not talking about the Wookiee. I'm talking about the data. He initiated a purge. Not just a deletion, a rewrite. He uploaded a virus he had written back in the Batcave, adapted for Imperial code. It would scour the servers, corrupting the blueprints for the cybernetic integration. It would turn years of research into digital noise. No, Silo screamed. The Emperor, he will kill me. He might, Batman said coldly. "But if you continue this work, I'll come back." He dropped Silo. Batman moved to the Wookiee. He scanned the cybernetics. The integration was crude. He couldn't save the limbs, but he could save the life. He adjusted the pain inhibitors, stabilizing the creature, and tagged the location for the rebel extraction team he had hacked earlier. "Andor," Batman spoke into his internal comms, broadcasting on the encrypted frequency he had stolen. "Grid 9 Zulu, Imperial Lab, hostages, clear the building. You have 10 minutes. "Who is this?" Cassian's voice crackled, tense. "How did you get this frequency?" 10 minutes. Batman turned to the main power generator for the lab. He placed 3 of his high-yield explosive charges on the coolant tanks. He wasn't going to blow up the building. He was going to kill the power, permanently. Without the specialized cryo chambers and fusion generators, the biological experiments would fail. The project would be set back years. As he set the timers, he felt a disturbance, not in the force, but in the air pressure. The door to the lab blew inward. Stormtroopers poured in, led by a black-clad figure. Not an Inquisitor, not Vader. A dark trooper, Phase 0, an early prototype, an aged clone trooper violently surgically grafted into a droid exoskeleton. Target identified. Terminate. The cyborg soldier droned, its voice a horrific mix of human and machine. Batman looked at the prototype. It was powerful, armored, and rentless. It was exactly what he had just studied. "Let's test the hypothesis," Batman said. He tapped the side of his cowl, switching his vision to electromagnetic spectrum. He could see the power conduits running through the dark trooper's limbs. He could see the unshielded regulator on his spine. The dark trooper raised a rotary blaster cannon. Batman charged.
The rotary cannon spun with a mechanical whine that signaled death. Batman didn't try to outrun the tracking speed of a cyborg. He went vertical. He fired his grapple gun at a heavy coolant pipe running across the ceiling, the liquid cable retracting instantly. He launched upward just as the dark trooper unleashed a torrent of red plasma. The floor where Batman had stood a microsecond ago disintegrated into slag. The Phase 0 dark trooper tracked him, the heavy servos in its neck grinding. It was a tragic amalgam of man and tank, an aging clone trooper forced to continue his service through mutilation and mechanization. Batman swung in a wide arc, releasing the line at the apex. He plummeted behind the cyborg. The trooper turned, raising the cannon to swat him out of the air. Batman landed on the cyborg's back. The magnetic clamps in his boots locked onto the trooper's armor. The cyborg thrashed, slamming backward into a surgical table, crushing the metal like foil. Batman held on, his cortosis-weave armor sparking as it scraped against the durasteel. He wasn't trying to overpower the machine. He was performing surgery. Schematic recall, spinal regulator, unshielded port C4. Batman jammed a modified shock stick into the gap between the trooper's helmet and the backplate. He didn't just deliver a voltage, he channeled a pulse from the Kyber crystal in his chest directly into the cyborg's central nervous system. The dark trooper convulsed. The rotary cannon fired wildly into the ceiling, bringing down a shower of sparks and debris. "Soldier," Batman grit out, his voice modulated low. "Stand down." He ripped the regulator wiring free. The red light in the trooper's visor flickered and died. The massive machine slumped forward, the weight of the exoskeleton too much for the atrophied man inside to support without power. The clone inside wasn't dead, but the war machine was offline. Silence returned to the lab, broken only by the crackle of severed wires. "Building cleared, charges set," Batman muttered to himself. The blast doors hissed open again. This time, it wasn't Imperials. Cassian Andor swept into the room, his A-280 rifle raised. K-2SO followed, stepping over the unconscious bodies of the stormtroopers Batman had dispatched earlier. Behind them, a squad of rebel pathfinders fanned out.
Cassian lowered his weapon when he saw the scene. The massive dark trooper defeated. The scientist, Silo, zip-tied to a pipe. The Wookiee stabilized on the table. "You actually did it," Cassian said, scanning the room. "The layout, it matches the data you sent." Batman stepped out from behind the fallen cyborg. "The coolant tanks are rigged to blow the power grid. You have the prisoners. Get them out." "And you?" Cassian asked. "We have a transport waiting. There's room." "I have work to do." "You can't win a war from the sewers," Cassian argued, signaling the medics to grab the Wookiee. "I'm not fighting a war," Batman said, moving toward the ventilation shaft. "I'm curing a disease." Before Cassian could respond, Batman vanished into the darkness of the shaft. 2 hours later, the Imperial Botanical Conservatory, Sector 4. This was a restricted zone, a lush, humid dome in the middle of the Steel City, housing rare flora from across the galaxy. It wasn't a park, it was a bioweapons research storage. Bruce Wayne moved through the foliage. The air was thick with pollen and humidity, misting his visor. He wasn't here for the scenery, he was here for Felucia. He found the containment unit labeled Felucian yerba spore. The database he'd stolen from Silo's lab had been comprehensive. The Empire used refined extracts from these spores for enhanced interrogation. It induced paranoia, auditory hallucinations, and terror. They used it to break minds. Bruce carefully unlocked the canister. He took a sample, placing it into the chemical analyzer built into his utility belt. Analysis: psychoactive alkaloid. Toxicity: high. Dispersion method: aerosol. He began to mix. Using the localized synthesizer in his belt, originally designed for creating antidotes, he inverted the compound. He stripped out the lethal toxicity, leaving only the hysolytic properties, and combined it with a bonding agent that would make the gas heavy, clinging to the floor and rising slowly like a living fog. He wasn't making a weapon of mass destruction, he was making a theatrical prop. He loaded the synthesized compound into 3 canister grenades. Imperial Garrison Base, Sector 4, the changing of the guard. 200 stormtroopers were stationed here, the iron fist that kept the local levels in check. They were disciplined, faceless, and fearless, or so they thought. Batman stood on the roof of the ventilation complex feeding the barracks. He dropped the 3 canisters into the main intake turbine. He waited. Inside the garrison, the air began to shimmer. A faint yellowish mist drifted from the vents. It smelled of wet earth and rot. "Ventilation malfunction," a deck officer muttered, tapping his console. "Maintenance, report to—" He stopped. The console wasn't a console anymore. The buttons were eyes, blinking at him. "Sir?" a trooper asked. The officer screamed and drew his blaster. "Get back! It's watching me!" Panic is a contagion. It spreads faster than a virus. Down in the mess hall, troopers began to shout. They didn't see their comrades. They saw their worst nightmares. For some, it was the Jedi they had killed, rising from the dead with burning flesh. For others, it was the walls closing in, growing teeth. Then the lights cut out. Batman dropped into the main atrium. He didn't need to fight. The toxin was doing the work. He was merely the conductor. He activated the acoustic dampeners in his boots. He walked through the chaos of flailing, screaming soldiers. To them, he wasn't a man in a suit. To the trooper on the left, Batman was a 10-foot-tall demon with wings of fire. To the sergeant on the right, Batman was a void, a hole in reality that was sucking the air out of the room. A trooper fired wildly at the shadows. "Stay back! It's everywhere!" Batman moved through the smoke. He grabbed a trooper by the collar. The man screamed, his mind amplifying the Batman cowl into a visage of pure death. "Tell your masters," Batman whispered, his voice projected through the garrison's PA system, which he had sliced into, "that Coruscant is no longer theirs." He left the trooper and ascended the central staircase. He reached the command center. The commander was huddled under his desk, trembling, his blaster pointed at the door. The toxin had hit him hard. Batman kicked the door open. The commander fired. The bolt went wide, hitting a display screen. Batman walked forward, the red kyber crystal in his chest glowing through the fog like a baleful eye. He reached down and crushed the blaster in the commander's hand. "Look at me," Batman commanded. The commander looked. He didn't see a vigilante. He saw the inevitable. What are you?" the commander wept. Batman leaned in close. "I'm the consequence." He knocked the man unconscious. Batman moved to the viewport. Below him, the garrison was in shambles. Soldiers were fleeing into the streets, stripping off their armor, terrified of the air itself. The symbol of Imperial order had been reduced to a madhouse. He had broken their morale without killing a single man. But he knew this was the tipping point. The Empire could ignore a few dead gangsters. They could ignore a sabotaged lab, but they could not ignore the humiliation of an entire legion. He had challenged their monopoly on fear, and somewhere in the cold vacuum of space or the dark spire of the Imperial Palace, the response was being drafted. Bruce touched the crystal in his chest. It was warm. He was ready. The Imperial Palace was a spire that pierced the heavens, a needle of obsidian and steel that looked down upon the clouds. In the Emperor's private observation deck, the air was cold, recycled, and heavy with the oppressive weight of the dark side. Emperor Palpatine sat in his rotating throne, staring out at the endless cityscape of Coruscant. Behind him, the breathing was rhythmic, mechanical, and terrified the entire galaxy. "Koopa! Koopa!" "The garrison in Sector 4 remains quarantined," Palpatine said, his voice a dry rasp. 200 loyal soldiers reduced to weeping children. They speak of demons. They speak of shadows that bite. Darth Vader stood motionless, his thumbs hooked in his belt. "A chemical agent, a hallucinogen derived from Felucian spores. Crude, effective on weak minds." "Is it?" Palpatine turned, his yellow eyes glinting. "It is not the chemistry that interests me, Lord Vader. It is the methodology. This insurgent does not fight for territory. He does not fight for the rebellion's naive ideals of democracy. He fights to instill terror." The Emperor smiled, a thin, cruel line. "He is using our weapon against us. He is ruling by fear." Darth Vader's gloved fist tightened. "He is a pretender, a terrorist with parlor tricks." "Perhaps," Palpatine mused, "but he has dismantled the cybernetics division, crippled the supply line, and neutralized a garrison without firing a blaster. The ISB is incompetent to handle him. The Inquisitorius has already lost one of its own." The Emperor stood, walking slowly toward his apprentice. "He is not a Jedi. I sense no light in him. In fact, I sense nothing at all. He is a void in the Force, a wound." Palpatine's eyes narrowed. "Find him, Lord Vader, dissect him, and show the galaxy that there is only one true master of fear." "It will be done, my master." Vader turned, his cape sweeping across the polished floor. The hunt was his. Level 1313, the works. This entire sector was a graveyard of heavy industry, abandoned centuries ago when manufacturing moved off-world. It was a labyrinth of rusting smashers, silent conveyor belts, and massive blast furnaces that had gone cold. It was the perfect kill box. Batman stood in the center of a defunct smelting chamber. The ceiling was a mesh of catwalks and chains. The floor was a grid of iron grating over a drop that went down into the planetary mantle. He was welding. Sparks showered over his armor as he fused a heavy-duty electrostatic discharge unit to the floor plates. He moved with a feverish intensity. He had calculated the arrival time. Vader wouldn't search door to door. Vader would draw him out. Bruce paused, wiping soot from his cowl. He checked the readout on his chest. The Kyber crystal was stable, but the output was climbing. He had overclocked the suit's servos to 150%. He would be faster, stronger than any human had a right to be. But against a Sith Lord, strength was irrelevant. This wasn't a boxing match, it was an exorcism. He picked up a device he had constructed from the scavenged parts of the Dark Trooper prototype, a sonic emitter. He had tuned it not to stun, but to resonate at the specific frequency of a pressurized life support respirator. "Computer," Batman said, "run simulation. Target, cyborg life support, vulnerability assessment." The holographic display projected a wireframe of Vader's armor. Analysis. Life support is shielded against EMP, hardened against physical trauma. Vulnerability. Atmospheric intake. Vulnerability. Connection to neural net. "If I can't shut the suit down," Bruce muttered, "I have to make it a prison." A tremor ran through the floor. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a passing train. It was a wave of pressure, a psychic weight that pressed against the temples. The rats in the shadows scurried away, squeaking in panic. The air grew colder. He was here. Batman looked up. He didn't need sensors. He could feel the darkness approaching. It was distinct from the Inquisitor's presence. The Inquisitor had been a storm. Vader was a black hole. Batman activated the perimeter sensors. A single shuttle, T-4A Lambda class, was descending through the smog shafts, flanked by TIE interceptors. It wasn't landing at a spaceport. It was landing on the roof of the factory. "Showtime," Batman whispered. He killed the lights. Darth Vader descended the ramp of his shuttle. The wind whipped his cape, but he stood immovable. He did not bring stormtroopers. He did not bring death troopers. This was personal. He walked to the edge of the roof, looking down into the cavernous darkness of the factory below. He reached out with the Force. He expected to sense the fear of the prey. He expected the frantic heartbeat, the spike of adrenaline. He found silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of discipline, a mind walled off behind layers of trauma and iron will. "You are waiting," Vader said, his voice amplified by the helmet, booming down into the structure. He ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade hissed to life, casting a blood-red glow on the rain-slicked roof. Vader stepped off the ledge. He didn't fall. He descended, the Force slowing his descent, a dark god floating down into the underworld. He landed on the main catwalk of the smelting chamber. The only light came from his blade and the faint red pulsation of the crystal hidden somewhere in the dark below. "You have attacked my servants. You have stolen my property. You have insulted the Emperor." The voice echoed off the rusted machinery. "I'm not finished," a voice replied. It didn't come from one direction. It came from everywhere, bouncing off the acoustic dampeners Batman had set up. Vader paused, tilting his head. "You rely on theatricality, shadows, deception. These are tools for children. And what do you rely on?" From the darkness, a batarang flew. Vader didn't even turn. He raised his hand, catching the projectile in mid-air with the Force. "Toys," Vader scoffed. He crushed the batarang. Click. The batarang wasn't explosive. It was a flashbang, rigged with magnesium core. It detonated in Vader's grip with the brightness of a supernova. Vader roared, flinching back, his optical sensors overloaded by the sudden spike in lumens. Batman struck. He dropped from the ceiling, not silently this time, but with the roar of a jet engine. He had rigged the grapple winch to accelerate his descent. He slammed into Vader with the force of a wrecking ball. The impact drove the Sith Lord to one knee. Batman didn't stop. He unleashed a flurry of strikes, a gauntleted fist to the helmet's vocoder, a knee to the chest control panel, an elbow to the connection point of the shoulder pauldron. Sparks flew. The cortosis-weave on Batman's knuckles shorted out the micro-energy field around Vader's armor. Vader recovered instantly. He caught Batman's fist in his hand. The strength was absolute. It was like hitting a mountain. "Impressive," Vader rumbled. He threw Batman across the room. Batman flew 30 feet, crashing through a rusted control console. He rolled, recovering to his feet, his cape swirling around him. Vader stood up, dusting off his shoulder. The red blade hummed at his side. "You are strong, enhanced, cybernetics, training," Batman spat, cycling his suit's power distribution to the legs. "You have the discipline of a Jedi, but none of the power. You are nothing." Vader thrust his hand out. The Force seized Batman. Bruce felt his ribs groan under the pressure. He was lifted off the ground, his feet dangling. The invisible grip tightened around his throat. "I will peel this armor from your flesh and see what weak thing lies beneath." Batman gasped, his vision swimming. He couldn't break the grip physically, but he could break the concentration. Batman triggered the remote charge he had welded to the floor, the electrostatic unit. A massive EMP pulse erupted from the grating beneath Vader's feet. It wasn't enough to kill the suit. Vader's armor was military grade, but it caused a momentary feedback loop. The vocoder static screamed. The optical sensors rebooted. For 1 second, Vader was blind and deaf. The Force grip vanished. Batman dropped to the floor. He didn't retreat. He activated the red kyber crystal in his chest. The suit hummed with a violent, unstable energy. He drew a hilt from his belt. Not a lightsaber, a vibroblade, modified with a cortosis edge, vibrating at a supersonic frequency. "I'm not a Jedi," Batman growled, leveling the blade. "I'm the one who beats them." Vader shook.
The clash was not the ringing of steel on steel. It was the sickening sizzle of conflicting energies. Batman's vibroblade, edged with the stolen cortosis-weave and vibrating at supersonic speeds, met the crimson plasma of Darth Vader's lightsaber. Physics demanded the metal be sliced in two, but the cortosis rejected the energy, shorting the containment field of the lightsaber for a microsecond. The red blade sputtered and dimmed. In that fraction of a second, Batman stepped inside the Sith Lord's guard. He drove a reinforced knee into Vader's thigh, aiming for the mechanical joint. It was like kicking a blast door. The impact jarred Bruce's entire skeletal structure, but he didn't relent. He followed with a spinning backhand, his gauntleted fist charged with the raw output of the kyber crystal, slamming into Vader's helmet. The blow would have decapitated a stormtrooper. Vader's head merely snapped to the side. The lightsaber flared back to life, humming with renewed fury. Vader didn't counterattack, he simply expanded. A wave of force energy exploded outward from his body. Batman was hurled backward. He fired his grapple gun mid-flight, snagging a hanging chain to arrest his momentum. He swung around a massive rusted smelting pot, using it as cover. "You fight well for a corpse," Vader's voice boomed, calm and terrifyingly devoid of exertion. The Sith Lord clenched his fist. The smelting pot, weighing 20 tons, crumpled inward as if crushed by a giant invisible hand. Batman released the line and dropped into the shadows of the lower gantries, just as the metal husk was torn from its moorings and hurled across the chamber. Bruce landed in a crouch, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The suit's medical systems were screaming, rib fractures detected, internal hemorrhage, armor integrity at 60%. The kyber crystal in his chest was burning hot, the heat sink failing to disperse the energy of the constant output. He was fighting a god with a battery and a knife. "Computer," Bruce rasped, "engage sonic protocol." He moved, circling the perimeter. He couldn't go toe-to-toe. He had to dismantle the machine. Vader stood in the center of the devastation, his helmet turning slowly. "I can hear your heart, Batman. It beats with the desperation of a trapped animal." Batman threw 3 small discs. They didn't fly at Vader. They attached to the metal walls surrounding him. Activation. The sonic emitters shrieked. It wasn't a noise, it was a weaponized frequency tailored to the exact resonance of the pressurized atmospheric exchange in Vader's life support system. Vader stumbled. The rhythmic coo-pa of his breathing hitched. A screech of feedback erupted from his vocoder. He clutched his chest, the machinery fighting to cycle air against the sonic interference. "The suit," Batman whispered from the dark. "It keeps you alive. It's also your cage." Batman lunged from the darkness above, vibroblade leading. But pain was an old friend to Darth Vader. He fed on it. The disruption to his breathing didn't weaken him, it enraged him. The dark side surged, fueled by the suffering. Vader sensed the attack without hearing it. He spun, his lightsaber swinging in a vicious upward arc. Batman twisted in mid-air, the red blade grazing his cortosis chest plate. The armor absorbed the heat, saving his life, but the kinetic force knocked him out of the air. He slammed onto the grating. Before he could rise, an invisible grip seized him. Vader stood over him, one hand clutching his own malfunctioning chest panel, the other outstretched. The sonic emitters on the walls exploded simultaneously, crushed by the force. "You think this inconvenience defeats me?" Vader stepped closer, the floor plates groaning under his boots. "I have suffered worse than you can imagine." He lifted Batman into the air. Bruce clawed at his throat, his boots dangling feet above the drop to the planet's core. The pressure on his windpipe was absolute. His vision began to tunnel. Contingency. Use the crystal. Bruce's hand moved to his chest. He didn't try to pry Vader's fingers loose. He routed the full, unbuffered power of the unstable red kyber crystal into his gauntlets. The capacitors whined, a sound that rose to a fever pitch. "You want power?" Batman choked out. He clapped his hands together directly in front of Vader's face, discharging the energy in a directed blast of pure, raw plasma. It wasn't a force push, it was a shaped charge of energy. The explosion blew them apart. Vader was thrown back, his cape burning, his helmet scorched. He slammed into a support pillar, the impact shaking dust from the ceiling high above. Batman hit the ground hard, rolling to extinguish the flames on his own cape. His gauntlets were smoking, the circuitry fused. He had lost his primary offensive weapon. The kyber crystal in his chest was cracked, pulsing with a dangerous, erratic rhythm. Warning, critical failure, core meltdown imminent. Bruce stood up. He swayed. Vader stood up. He didn't sway. The Sith Lord's armor was smoking. One lens of his mask was cracked, revealing a sliver of the burned, pale flesh underneath. The vocoder was damaged, his breathing now a ragged, wheezing rasp that sounded wet and painful. But he was still standing. "You are," Vader wheezed, igniting his lightsaber again. "Persistent." Bruce analyzed the opponent. The man was broken, the machine was failing, and yet the will drove the body forward.
It was the same drive that pushed Bruce Wayne to prowl the rooftops of Gotham. Obsession, pain, purpose. They were mirrors. Batman dropped the useless vibroblade. He reached into his belt and pulled out a detonator. "This facility," Batman said, his voice steady despite the agony. "It's built on a geothermal tap. Unstable." Vader paused. "I didn't rig the room to kill you," Batman said. "I rigged the foundation." He pressed the detonator. Deep below them, in the magma vents of the planet's crest, the charges he had planted hours ago detonated. The works didn't just shake, they screamed. The floor beneath them buckled, the main support beams groaned and sheared. The entire smelting complex began to tilt, sliding toward the abyss of the Coruscant underworld. Vader lost his footing, sliding toward the edge. He stabbed his lightsaber into the floor to anchor himself. Batman fired his grapple gun, not at a wall, but at the TIE interceptor Vader had landed on the roof, which was now sliding down through the collapsing ceiling. "You aren't done," Vader roared over the sound of tearing metal. "Yes," Batman said, as the line retracted, pulling him up and away from the crumbling platform. The ceiling collapsed. Tons of debris rained down, separating the Dark Knight and the Dark Lord. Batman swung through the chaos, dodging falling girders and plumes of escaping steam. He crashed onto a service ledge 100 meters up, watching the smelting chamber disintegrate below. He saw the red glow of the lightsaber one last time, cutting through a falling slab of durasteel, before the entire structure gave way, plunging into the deep dark of the lower levels. Bruce lay on the cold metal of the ledge. The kyber crystal in his chest finally died, its energy spent, turning into a dull gray rock. His suit was dead weight. His body was a map of bruises and fractures. He rolled onto his back, staring up at the distant smog-choked lights of the upper levels. He hadn't won. You don't win against a hurricane. You just survive it. But he had looked the devil in the eye and made him blink. He forced himself to sit up. He had to move. The Empire would swarm this sector in minutes. The rebellion would be watching. The underworld would be whispering. He was no longer just a rumor. He was the man who brought the roof down on Darth Vader. Bruce Wayne tapped his comms, switching to the encrypted rebel frequency. "Andor." "I'm here." Cassian's voice came back, urgent. "We saw the seismic spike. The whole sector is destabilizing. Did you... Is he... "He's alive," Batman said, standing up and wrapping the tattered remains of his cape around him. "But he knows he can bleed." "We have a transport at the rendezvous. Get out of there." "No transport," Batman said. "I need a fabrication unit and medical supplies." "Where are you going?" Batman looked down into the abyss where Vader had fallen. Deeper.
The pain was a map, and Bruce Wayne had memorized every contour. He sat on a crate in a sub-level pumping station, Sector 1315, 2 levels deeper than his previous safe house. The air here was thick with the smell of recycled coolant and ancient dust. He was shirtless, the pale skin of his back a tapestry of old scars from Gotham and angry, fresh burns from the cortosis armor superheating against his flesh. He held a laser cauterizer he had stolen from the med lab. He didn't use anesthetic. He needed the adrenaline to keep his focus sharp while his body screamed for sleep. Flash, hiss, burn. He sealed the laceration on his flank. He exhaled slowly, watching the steam rise from his skin in the cold air. On the workbench in front of him lay the remains of his cowl. The left lens was shattered. The Kevlar weave was fused with durasteel slag. The red kyber crystal, once a pulsing heart of unstable power, was now a dull gray rock cracked down the center. It had given everything it had to save him. Status:
he rasped. The portable terminal he had salvaged flickered. The connection to the encrypted rebel frequency was active but silent. He wasn't tracking the rebellion right now, he was tracking the news. The HoloNet was in a frenzy. Catastrophic structural failure in Industrial Sector 4. Imperial authorities cite rebel sabotage of a geothermal valve. Casualties confirm 142 Imperial personnel. The sector is under martial law. Propaganda. They were burying the truth under a landslide of bureaucracy. They wouldn't admit that a single man had collapsed a factory on top of the supreme commander of the Imperial military. But the streets knew. Bruce tapped a key, shifting the feed to the lower frequencies, the encrypted chatter of the smugglers, the spice runners, the swoop gangs. I saw him, I swear, wings like a demon, took a walker down with his bare hands. They say Vader is dead. They say the shadow ate him. The stormtroopers are scared, man. They aren't patrolling the lower levels tonight. They're staying in the light. A grim satisfaction settled in Bruce's chest. The narrative had shifted. The Empire was no longer the monster in the closet. He was. He picked up a sheet of cortosis-weave he had saved. He began to hammer it flat. He had no Alfred here, no Lucius Fox, just his hands and the garbage of 1 trillion beings. He would rebuild. He would adapt. The Batwing was gone, but there were TIE fighters to be stolen. The Batmobile was a memory, but repulsor tech offered new possibilities for speed. A chime on the console broke his concentration. Incoming transmission. Priority 1. Answer, Bruce commanded. A hologram flickered to life. It wasn't Cassian. It was a woman with auburn eyes and eyes that carried the weight of worlds. Mon Mothma. Mr. Wayne, she said. She didn't use a code name. I know Captain Andor briefed me on your methods. Bruce continued to work on the armor plating, not looking up. Then you know I'm busy. I know you've done the impossible, Mothma said, her voice steady. You've proven the Empire bleeds, but you cannot fight an entire galaxy alone. The Inquisitorius will not stop. Vader will not stop. We can offer you resources, a ship, a place in the Alliance. Bruce stopped hammering. He looked at the hologram, his eyes dark and intense. You fight a political war, Senator. You want to restore a republic that allowed the Empire to arise in the first place. I'm not interested in politics. Then what are you interested in? Justice, Batman said, and you can't vote for that. We are fighting for the same thing. No. Bruce stood, casting a long shadow over the damp walls. You're fighting to win. I'm fighting to make sure they lose. There's a difference. He cut the connection. He didn't need their permission. He needed them to stay out of his way. High above, in the ruins of Sector 4, the cleanup crews were working under the gaze of death troopers. Huge magnetic cranes lifted twisted girders from the smoking crater of the works. A Lambda-class shuttle touched down on a secure landing pad. The ramp lowered. Darth Vader limped down the ramp. He refused the medical droids that hovered anxiously around him. His armor was scorched, the cape burned away to tattered strips. His breathing was labored, the mechanical rhythm catching on damaged fluid filters. Pa. Grand Moff Tarkin was waiting for him. The governor looked at the Sith Lord with a mixture of distaste and calculated concern. Lord Vader, Tarkin clipped, the Emperor is demanding a report. The loss of the facility is substantial. Vader stopped. He looked at Tarkin, the cracked lens of his helmet masking his eyes. The facility is irrelevant, Vader wheezed. Irrelevant? We have lost months of research. The cybernetics division is the enemy, Vader interrupted, his voice a low growl that vibrated in Tarkin's chest, has evolved. Vader looked out at the city. He could still feel the phantom pressure of the sonic disruption in his lungs. He could still feel the heat of the plasma blast. For 20 years he had hunted Jedi, monks who clung to a dying religion, fighting with honor and predictable rules. This was different. This adversary fought with the ruthlessness of the dark side, but served a code Vader could not yet decipher. He felt no force in the Batman, yet the man commanded fear like a Sith. "He is not a rebel," Vader said, more to himself than Tarkin. "He is a disease, and I will be the cure." "Shall I double the garrison?" Tarkin asked. "No." Vader turned, walking towards his personal meditation chamber. "Recall the Inquisitors, all of them. This is not a hunt for soldiers, it is a hunt for a beast. We will burn the Undercity until there is nowhere left to hide." 3 nights later, the rain had returned, heavier than before. The smog was so thick that it turned the neon lights of the district into bloody smears of color. On the spire of the blackened, ruined factory in Sector 4, the tomb where Batman and Vader had danced with death, a new light appeared. It wasn't a spotlight, it was a hack. Bruce had spent the last 48 hours splicing into the projection units of the massive holographic billboards surrounding the sector. These ads usually displayed Imperial recruitment ads or credit exchange rates. At exactly midnight, the ads flickered and died. Static washed over the screens, visible for 10 vertical miles. Then an image resolved. It wasn't the Imperial cog, it wasn't the rebel starbird, it was a silhouette. Sharp ears, spreading wings, a predator on a white background. The bat signal. It hung in the air, a silent, defiant mark branded on the face of the Empire's capital. Down on the streets, a squad of stormtroopers looked up. They stopped their patrol. They gripped their blasters tighter. They're not looking for rebels anymore. They're checking the shadows. "Did you hear that?" one trooper whispered. "Hear what?" "Nothing. Exactly." High above them, perched on a gargoyle overlooking the new signal, the Batman watched. His armor was different now. The cape was shorter, weighted for combat. The chest plate was a patchwork of scavenged Imperial plastoid and cortosis-weave, painted matte black. His utility belt was restocked with thermal detonators, grappling spikes, and fear toxin derived from the stars. He was battered, he was hunted, he was miles from home in a galaxy that defied the laws of physics he understood. But as he looked down at the fear spreading through the ranks of the white-armored soldiers, Bruce Wayne felt a cold resolve settle over him. Gotham was a city, Coruscant was a world. The mission hadn't changed, the scale had just increased. He stood up, the wind catching his cape. He fired the grapple gun, the liquid cable singing as it pierced the night. The dark night swung into the abyss.